Jamel, you said Rachel was not joining us tonight or be coming in late. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what she said. She had a obligation she had to attend, but she said she might try and
Rachel was
join.
not joining us tonight.
Yeah, most likely. So Roger is next man up if
I go down.
Nick goes down.
We're all rooting for you, Nick.
Especially Roger. It's been a lot better since I've had some service done. A lot better. Oh.
Good.
All right, I show it at 6:30. I think we've got everyone we are supposed to have at this point. You guys ready to do this?
I know
All right.
Angela will be popping on here in just a moment, but certainly the board can get started.
Sure. All right. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. Please note that this is a continuation of the Monday, June 22nd, 2020 Planning Board meeting. We did continue the 22nd meeting till this evening, left off at item number 9. Administratively, we have Rachel, who may be joining us later, but in the meantime, we're going to have our first alternate, Richter become a voting member for the evening. I have one quick note here, which is that this is a Zoom meeting. It's a remote meeting. People can access this meeting by going to the Planning Board's webpage, and for viewing only, you can click on the YouTube link. If you wanted to attend the Planning Board meeting virtually and provide public comment at the meeting, you can click on the Zoom link found on the Planning Board website for the town of Scarborough. Planning Board recommends written public comment prior to an upcoming meeting. At this given time, the remote video conference meeting format directions can be found on the Planning Board's webpage. Attendees are muted and can raise their hand to be called on during public comment parts of the agenda. Please only raise your hand once it's time for public comment and not during the applicant's presentation or board deliberation. That feature can be found on a little button on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen most of the time. If the chair happens to drop off the meeting due to technical difficulties, the vice chair will run the remainder of the meeting until the chair can return. Tonight, that duty falls to the secretary, which is Roger Beely, unless Rachel Hendrickson, our vice chair, does return or is able to appear this evening. All right, with that said, I'll open it up for item number 9. Developers Collaborative Pre-Development LLC requests a site plan review within phase 1 of the Downs Assessor's Map R52 Lot 4. Jamel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as you may recall, the applicant's proposing a multi-phase project that will include the construction of 2 4-story residential buildings that will consist of 39 affordable senior housing units within each building. The project is located within the phase 1 mixed residential development at the Downs. So during your last discussion, staff did note that the site plan and zoning standards require principal buildings to be oriented in a way that is compatible with neighboring structures and the development pattern in the vicinity of the project. So as requested by the board, the applicant has modified the design of the building facades facing the Downs Road to include doors, patios, and pergolas to provide private outdoor space for the adjacent units and additional fenestration along these elevations. So the board should be sure to discuss these design elements and if you're comfortable with these design modifications. The applicant's also requesting the board to approve the growth permits from the reserve pool, given the project's eligibility as affordable housing. So the board should be sure to determine that the project can utilize the requested growth permits from the reserve pool during the meeting this evening. And staff would also like to note that the applicant has received their main DEP permit and has prepared a draft motion with conditions with the board's consideration. And at this point, I'll ask Angela to discuss any remaining stormwater or drainage system issues with the board. Thanks.
There were a couple of items under the main elements. I guess I just wanted to bring up. One being, we keep talking about the front area between the building and the Downs Road, and there's been a huge improvement there. Can Caleb and Steve at Coral Palmer have done a lot of rework along that front section. So at this point, it's pretty minor, but I just want to make sure that the grades coming out of some of those doorways, it's now someone's back patio type of thing, and making sure that we look at what those elevations of those rims are set at. So that was just a follow-up, I guess. Not concerned. I think it's minor. I think we can work through that pretty easily with Coral Palmer. The second one, though, was more about the chlorides. We've been talking about from the beginning that this watershed in particular has concerns about high level of chlorides just because of the high development in this overall watershed. And so one of the things that Coral Palmer has been working intensely on is trying to figure out that issue and what they can do on this particular site. And so where they're headed with it is reducing the amount of chlorides on the site. So reducing the amount of salt used in the winter. And so I just wanted to, I guess, put in another plug and have a conversation with the planning board about how that works as far as the contractors typically get paid per weight of salt used. So it's in their incentive to continue to put more salt down when it's not needed. So there's really needs to be something kind of woven into maybe their contract. At this point, Coral Palmer has put that in through their O&M. I think it might be beneficial since they are reporting annually for our Chapter 419 reporting is maybe to put something in there about showing us how much salt is being used at the site. We can kind of track it and see some trending. I think this would be, again, a highlighted project that we could look at for the town to see, is this working, and then we can use in other sites, or is there some hiccups that we can learn from this, and with a future project, future site, we can have kind of the lessons learned and try to move forward in a productive way.
Thank you, Jamal. This time I'll turn it over to the applicant, Mr. Bushy or Mr. Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Laura Reading will give our first opening comments. We'll try to make it brief here tonight, knowing that you have a full agenda. We're much appreciative of the fact that you folks are having another meeting here, particularly in the summer months with vacations and so forth. So greatly appreciated to get us in here tonight. So I'll let Laura, they'll kick us off. Thanks.
Good evening. Happy to keep this brief. As you know, the units at the Uplands will be rented to seniors earning 60% of area median income or less. Currently, that's about $44,000 for a two-person household and about $39,000 for a one-person household. The board did provide some great feedback for us the last time that we were here, but I think we've landed on a design that better interacts and connects with Scarborough Downs Road and provides good pedestrian access as well. As Jamal mentioned, we do have our DEP permit in hand now, so I'm hopeful that the board will consider taking action on our item tonight. Phase 1 has already received the allocation of low-income housing tax credits, so we could start construction on phase 1 this summer and make some good progress before winter. And so I'll just let Steve jump in and go through the changes that we've made since the last time we were here with the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jamel, can I share screen now?
Yes, go ahead.
So I'm just going to quickly go through a few slides and then cover a couple of the comments with respect to staff comments and Angela's explanation here on the salt piece. So here is the overall of the Downs and our site, within the Mill Village South District, just off of US Route 1. So as you enter in off of Route 1, would be the first site to the left, a little over 2 acres. And we'd have 2 buildings within that area. But this gives you a general sense. We're far closer to Route 1 than we are to the Payne Road or Higas Parkway and the core of the Downs development. Our site plan, which you folks have seen previously, shows 2 buildings, 39 units each. It'll be a phased approach in that just a single building here, phase 1, would be constructed with 39 units. We have a total of 4 floors and an entrance off of the Downs access road going basically north-south past our site. Few of the changes that we have made since we last presented to you folks include, in no specific order here, but probably most importantly relative to the building and its presentation along the street front. And I'm going to let Nick in a moment talk about a nice rendering that he had done. But basically the addition to the front face of each of the building of some private patio pergola areas to try to enlighten at least the ground level of each of these buildings. Then secondly, we've added some parking along the main entry. As we come in off of the Downs access road, there would be a number of spaces here just off to the right. By placing those spaces here in between the two buildings, that has allowed us in the future, the phase 2 building is here to the north side of the site. Previously, we presented you folks a parking lot in the far north end, and I think there was a little bit of hesitancy from the board and others perhaps about that placement of parking up on that north end. So we have eliminated the parking on the north end, but we still do need to provide a fire department access route. We've worked hard with the fire department to come upon an acceptable routing and access for both of these buildings, basically on 3 sides: the main entry, the parking lot sides, and then the north side of the phase 2 building and the south side of the phase 1 building. And the importance of that is that along the Downs access road, there are overhead power lines, and those overhead power lines present a problem for the fire department with respect to access to the upper floors with their ladder apparatus. So they wanted to have really the access on the other 3 sides of the building improved, and I believe that's what we've provided them here. Another key point that you folks had raised has had staff, and that is the installation construction here of a sidewalk effectively for the full length of the project frontage. And we're showing you now basically a sidewalk that'll connect to the south end of the phase 1 building, be placed along the Downs access road frontage, a crosswalk at our driveway, and then a continuation of that sidewalk all the way to the north end and just off the screen here where the bus pickup would be that's existing today. And there's a crosswalk over the Downs access road to the existing sidewalk system and other residential areas, neighborhoods further into the property, into the site. Again, just for clarity, the phase line that we're depicting here, and it's on the subdivision plan that you folks previously looked at, and that is a line right along the middle here, so to speak. So we have phase 1 area here with its parking lot, and then the phase 2 area. Here's the landscape plan, and why don't I let Nick Aceto chime in. The next 2 figures here, Nick, are yours, and I figured I'd highlight those and let you delve into the placement of landscaping and so forth.
Sure. Yeah. So I think Steve did a pretty good job of giving an overall kind of overview of the project. But the biggest changes, I think, from the last time we saw the plan in terms of planting and placemaking have been to pull these terraces up closer to the ends of the buildings on either end, both at the north end of the phase 2 building and the south end of the phase 1 building. And that's a good thing because the residents will have direct access to the terraces, and we're indicating that there could be some sort of paving change so that it's not all asphalt, but maybe there's some scored concrete or pavers, we're not sure yet, but some sort of change in paving to kind of delineate between the pedestrian space and vehicles. Also, as Steve mentioned, the sidewalks connect around the building, and we've taken a close look at the streetscape along Downs Road and worked really closely with GP and Steve to align the utilities and consolidate utilities and also stormwater infrastructure as much as possible so that we could fit a really robust streetscape in here. So what we're showing, we have a very, very tight kind of corridor to work within, but we're showing, a rhythm of typical 40 to 45 foot space, deciduous street trees. And we think a columnar maple will work well there, where we can kind of thread the needle between a compact canopy that'll fit within the, between the building and the overhead lines that are existing, but also we have gas lines below. So we were really deliberate about where we place the trees and the grading. And then in terms of kind of the understory, we have miscanthus grass that creates a little bit of a mid-level, mid-story against the building, helps resolve the scale. And a ground cover, we're looking at a gallium ground cover there. So a lot of texture and a little bit of color. And then also some ornamental planting here you can see in the foreground against that outdoor terrace seating area that you can kind of catch a glimpse of to the left. So that's I think that sums up for the most part the planting strategy and some of the changes we've made since the last time. And I'll be happy to answer questions or discuss with the board any suggestions or comments.
I would add that this depiction here, this rendering does a nice job as well, showing the front face of the buildings and the pergola areas and terraces that'll be provided for 3 of the units, or 3 or 4 of the units actually, along the base of each of the buildings. So in a moment, I'm going to get to the grading and drainage plan here. And to Angela's point, we have done a fair amount of update and modification to address some of the comments and concerns that we received earlier. And principally along that front area here, we've kind of cleaned that up. I think the staff's comment about the grading at a 2-to-1 slope, we have a very subtle depression area near this catch basin structure. And I think just a modest level of adjustment in the field, when that gets done and installed, we can avoid that drop. It's not as though it's a really steep, deep area. We're only talking 1 foot grade change. So it's something I think that is very manageable. But we did try to clean up this area along each frontage of the building. Back again, just to point out that our primary stormwater management measure that the department has reviewed is the use of a porous pavement section here. And we think that will be a really nice additional stormwater management technique here for the overall Downs development. We're hopeful that it'll be highly successful. And then finally, the utility plan, I'll point out, has just one adjustment that we had made, and that is the installation of water lines here into the phase 2 building in the future. Our earlier plan that we had presented to you showed the water line coming up through the main driveway, and that was going to entail some additional excavation work in the street. And I know there had been some staff comment about street paving and moratorium issues and so forth, and we think that the current revised location is a more acceptable location. Certainly will benefit the phase 2 building when that comes around. We have site lighting that I believe is in compliance with the town standards, regular light poles around and some building mounted lights. You've seen on the plan, we've got provisions to provide a fair number of handicap spaces, and this plan in fact depicts quite a few handicap spaces. We've basically given us the ability to add handicap spaces as additional handicap units might get leased out in the buildings. So I think our total is as many as 28 ADA spaces. Potentially could happen. That's not the required amount, but there are the ability to handle that. I'll note as well, I think there had been a planning board comment about electric vehicle charging stations, and it is something that the owner is considering and is not precluding the ability to install those in the future, depending upon tenant demand. So things will be in place, but they're not installing them right now, but will be ready if tenant demand were to push them in that direction to install those EV charging stations. As an affordable housing, senior housing facility, this is the type of project that's on tight margins, and it's tough to get through on construction and in the right and appropriate construction value. So sometimes things have to be sacrificed to get things moving and constructed. So. And I just have a cross section here if in the event that we need to talk about that during the board deliberations. But besides that, Mr. Chairman, that would conclude our presentation, and happy to turn it back over to the board.
Thank you, appreciate it. We do have an opportunity for public comment on this item. If you're here in attendance and would like to speak, please use the raise my hand feature on the bottom corner of your panel. I'll give you a minute to find it. All right, seeing none, I'm gonna turn this over for board comment. I just wanted, before we jump into it, Jay or Jamel, you touched on it briefly at the start in the intro. Can you give a little bit more background on the growth permit requests? Basically, the criteria that needs to be met, and then just a little bit of maybe some number backgrounds on how many permits are available, how many need to be pulled, that type of idea.
Sure. I'll jump in on that item. So our growth management ordinance, as some board members may recall, there's an annual allocation of number of growth permits. So that's really number of units that can be issued in a given year. And that number is 135 units throughout the town. Further, the growth management ordinance says that no one singular project can access more than 20% of those growth permits. So that actually amounts to 27 growth permits in a given year. There's a recognition in the growth management ordinance that, you know, our zoning does seek and provide for opportunities for multifamily type development, and that the annual allocation may hinder certain project types from moving forward. So it provides for a reserve pool of permits, which currently stands at, there are 180 plus or minus growth permits remaining in the reserve pool. The reserve pool is created by town council, but the allocation of those permits is planning board's efforts. And the ordinance talks about, there's really 4 standards that the board needs to find. There's 4 standards by which the planning board is to determine if a project is eligible. And a project only needs to demonstrate that it hits one of those eligibility criteria. One of those eligibility criteria for finding that the reserve pool permits could be issued is if at least 50% of the units were to be affordable housing units. And so therefore, where this is 100% affordable housing, they obviously meet that criteria. So finding that they meet the criteria, the board then is to determine if, and I'll actually grab the language, if you just bear with me one quick moment. Sorry about that. So the board is to determine if the use of growth permits from the annual allocation may not permit the dwelling units to be constructed in the project in a timely or efficient manner, or that the use of growth permits from the annual allocation may unreasonably reduce the availability of growth permits from the annual allocation. So this project, as I was 39 units. My understanding, I'll be pleased to be corrected if I'm wrong, is that these are all 1 bedroom and less than 750 square feet. And if that's a correct statement, then each unit really counts as a half a growth permit. This is getting back to our residential density calculations, as board members are probably much more familiar with, because we deal with, in so many cases, you know, units of a certain size either count as a half a unit or 2/3 of a unit or a whole unit for density purposes. And our growth management ordinance aligns the growth permit issuance to that same ratio. So in this case, total build out would be a total, if again, they're all 1 bedroom and less than 750 square feet, would be a total of 39 growth permits. So I'm sure there's some questions embedded in there, and that's pretty dense stuff, but I'll stop for a moment there.
Laura, go ahead. You had something to add to that?
I just wanted to clarify that there's 1 unit, excuse me, in each building that's a studio and not a 1 bedroom.
But it's still less than the 750 square feet.
Yep.
So that would still count as a half a
Okay.
unit, but thank you, yes.
Yep.
Okay, thanks for that, Jay. I appreciate it. All right, so I'm gonna just open this up in general to whoever wants to jump in first with any questions or comments. Roger, go ahead. Roger, you're muted.
Okay, so for this one building, which is going to be built this calendar year, I assume, that would basically be only 14.5 units out of that reserve. Is that correct, Jay?
No, it'd be 19.5. It's a 39 unit,
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
19.5.
Okay. So we're basically all set regarding that. We're well within those parameters.
Within which parameters?
The 180.
Oh, correct. Yes, yes.
Yeah,
It would
in
not.
the pool. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I think this project's really come along nicely. I guess the only question remaining is on the best practices pertaining to the porous surfaces. What does the applicant feel regarding Angela's recommendations?
I like the recommendations from Angela. We'll work with her. I think this will be a good location to basically get some benchmark type data. It will require a little bit of correspondence, and we're going to have to figure out that methodology that either this office or working along with the Developers Collaborative and their maintenance folks, whoever they have on their contract, to develop some degree of some reporting, and particularly on the salt usage that they're going to have. And then we can report that on to Angela. And if this is a means by which the town can then begin to establish some fundamental benchmarks for future application to other sites, then so be it. But this is not a huge site, and I think we can control it fairly tightly. It'll be interesting. My sense would be there might be beneficial to have other sites provide the same type of information, and then we can begin to make some comparisons between porous type sites and porous asphalt use versus just traditional paving, and see how those comparisons work out. Personally, I think we may find that the porous by itself will allow for less salt usage. We know that porous pavement typically involves little to no sand usage because we don't like to block up the porous pavement. And in that regard, some feel like there's more use of salt, but I'm kind of the feeling, at least in the few porous sites that I've been involved in the wintertime, those porous sites benefit from the fact that they will get sun radiation and absorb so much water, and they don't have as much ice formation on them. So let's see how it all works out. But I think we'll work out the language in our O&M to tighten that up a little bit in terms of how we can report back to the town.
Okay. I think the buildings look terrific. So I'm all set.
Thanks, Roger.
If I could just circle back to the reserve pool question, and maybe it's something that spurred out of what Roger had talked about. in terms of their remaining 180 growth permits, and certainly, the 19 and a half that are probably or likely to be sought this year, and ultimately a total of 39 certainly would fit within that 180 number. One of the things that the board could consider is looking at, because so far this year, we've really, to date, we're at about 50 of our growth permits have been issued. And so one of the ways, and you may have seen it in the draft motion, staff has thought about is the potential for, if there are available permits from the annual allocation for the project, that might be an appropriate place to draw from. And if those aren't available, certainly this is the type of project I believe that the reserve pool was created for. I should also mention that the ordinance does talk about the reserve pool. Once it's drawn down, as I said before, it's up to council to be able to provide for more permits in that reserve pool if they see fit. But if that reserve pool does ever get to zero annually, there are 20 new permits always added to the reserve pool that are set aside specifically for affordable housing projects such as this one. So I just felt that was another piece of the sort of complex layering that should be added.
So basically, if I understand what you're saying, Jay, instead of counting these units against the reserve pool, count them against the 135?
If those are available, that might be something the board could look at. And so the way the drafted condition would read at this point, we can talk a little bit more detail about that as we get into that point, should the board be in a position to make a motion, is right now it's written that the allocation of reserve pool growth permits may be issued for any units that cannot otherwise be accommodated by growth permits from the annual allocation. So it assures that this project could continue to move forward if that annual allocation.
It just seems to me, though, that the 135, I tend to want to stay with the reserve pool on a project like this because it's more flexible. So.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. Jennifer or Robin or Rick Duperi, or Rick Manking, do you have anything to, Jenna? Yeah, Jen, go ahead.
I was just curious if any thought had been given to providing any kind of vertical elements to the terraces on either end of the buildings. And the reason that I actually had a couple of questions around this area, some of which have already been answered. So thanks for a good intro by the applicant team here. But so that's my first question. Any vertical elements thought of here, whether they be permanent or temporary?
I think it's a great idea. I just think it probably comes down to cost. And so we've focused more on the streetscape and going kind of above and beyond with planting and letting the trees and the woody shrubs add a little bit more verticality and some filtered shade, and also benches and some seating. And I think I like the idea. I think I'd have to pitch it to Laura, but I have a feeling it would might blow our budget at this point.
Sure. Mostly the reason that I'm asking is because I'm glad to see that those spaces have kind of moved in at least one case back a little closer to the building. I just think that's going to be nicer for the people who will be sitting out there using them. But the long fire lane to the north of the phase 2 building kind of caught my eye. And I know that before you had some earlier editions of this plan where that would have served as access not only for fire lane, but 2 additional parking. But now that there's really, as I understand it, there would be no reason for anyone to be driving along that aisle. I just wonder about, and I see that you have signs proposed, but just wondering about any other cues that could be added to help deter people from driving there. Say, for example, if they're looping around looking for parking and they get all the way around a building and then they see, I was just curious what they would see. Would you see something that looks like a space that maybe you could keep driving into? Or would you see something that's definitely hinting at, geez, yikes, I really shouldn't be driving back here? So that was just kind of my question. I think the change in material is definitely a good idea to that end. And that, it's not necessarily, I understand that the budget is tight on this one. And I think there's a lot of other good reasons for having these spaces the way that they are, which I understand. But I was just curious about that kind of way where, a visitor or someone who might not otherwise be familiar with the site.
We have talked about doing some additional grass pave in that lane too, but I don't think it's something that, frankly, we're ready to commit to budget-wise yet. But maybe as we get to building permit, we'll look at peeling back some of that asphalt from the terrace. I should
have
mention
that as a note too, actually, grass pavers.
Okay, yeah. So we have looked at that, and it's a potential option. I should note too that on vertical elements in that terrace space, as Steve mentioned, fire is requiring that that space remains open for them to pull all the way into that terrace space to get access to that side of the building too.
Okay.
So that was a consideration. So we're trying to thread a bunch of needles on that space.
Understood.
Your points are well
Quickly,
taken.
just kind of following up to that, is it worth doing a no outlet or dead end or something sign, kind of trying to stop people from heading down that way?
I did see there's authorized vehicles only sign proposed, but yeah, I don't know. That's why I'm just asking the question. I think the aesthetic of a sign like that is probably a lot nicer than gigantic red and white do not enter signs. But maybe, I had also kind of circled those areas, and I don't know if like a simple fire lane pavement marking or something like that wouldn't be, overly cost prohibitive. Might just be something to reinforce. You could probably also try it as proposed, and if it becomes a problem, think of some other ideas later on. I only had one other question, and it pertains to parking. So as we've heard tonight and on other presentations here, understand the justification for why we're seeing such a large number of accessible parking spaces. But on this edition, seeing the shift of some of those parkings to be directly adjacent to the entrance drive there is just kind of, I know that's not ideal parking placement. I know that you've put parking there because you need to fit it and it's otherwise a tight site. But just the backing in and turning movements associated with those front sites so close to the driveway does kind of, the entrance off the street does kind of bother me a little bit. And so my question is just, had you at all considered, because Laura, as you mentioned, the number, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding this, the number of proposed accessible spaces shown here is a maximum based on potential, the highest potential number of accessible units, is that right? So if you are not, and I don't know if it's your intent to stripe all of these like this initially, but if it's not, if you are intending to hold some of these spaces for future accessible spaces due to units identified within the building, might you also bank those 6, I think there's 6 parking spaces along the drive aisle to just be available in the future if you did need to put these accessible spaces in, and you could probably do all of your base gravel work at the same time, and maybe just come in and surface pave those later on if you needed. And if you didn't need them, then you wouldn't have that kind of movement conflict concern.
Yeah, we, just a quick note, we wouldn't stripe all of those at first. We would wait to see how many were actually needed before striping them all.
Yeah, okay, that's all that I had.
Thank you, Jen. I'm gonna follow up on that real quick. Did you consider angled spots there? I was a little concerned about the straight in just because of the width of the roadway, and that's the only entry access point. And I know the angled parking, going in, makes probably a lot easier for people. Coming out, they'd have to clearly go around the parking lot to get out. But I just didn't know if that had been a consideration at any point.
We looked at it pretty closely. I think Steve, we were all on the call with Angela and Jamel and deciding what that, the proper site distance should be for people turning into the site and the driveway and turning into that first parking space. And remember, the movement is going to be backing out into the site, not backing into Downs Road. So, and it's going to be very rare where someone's coming in from Downs Road, turning and grabbing that first space. That, that'll happen more rarely, I think, than more commonly. So, did you have anything to add to that, Steve? I know we all looked at that pretty closely. So
Yeah, and I think we just chose the traditional perpendicular space for the ease of somebody entering and then being able to basically pull out and go back out onto Downs Road without having to circumnavigate through the parking lot if we had used an angled space. And then honestly, an angled space would take up effectively as much space, if not more. And as Nick said, that placement of the first space, we, looked at it and tried to give ourselves at least a car length for vehicles coming in off of the Downs Road before the first space was accessible. My sense is that those spaces will be more visitor likely for use, which is a good thing in that those visitors would be able to come in, have a parking space, and then be able to exit the site, not necessarily have to come too far into our parking lot. Which is, ideal to a certain extent. So I just don't see those spaces as being as commonly used by folks.
Thank you. Welcome, Rachel. Rick, Robin, or Rick, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll go if you don't mind, Nick.
Go ahead, Robin.
I have no objection to the 24-foot parking aisle width waiver that's requested. I would like to, I guess, just confirm that the applicant is willing to provide the town with the necessary snow and ice removal plans and annual reports on a regular basis. Has that been confirmed with the applicant?
Unless Laura wants to object, I believe that is fine. Yes, Robin, we're
Okay.
planning on doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, we're happy to share any data to be useful.
And just so you know too, sometimes contractors aren't going to want to share that information. So as Angela mentioned, it's very important that it go in the contract language, that it is specifically required. There's that, and I am also in favor of allowing this to leverage the reserve pool growth permits. And I believe that's all I have. Good work revising the plans to meet all the concerns. I think this is a great project, and we need more of these in Scarborough. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Rick, or Rachel? Rick Manking.
Yeah, just 3 things, and 2 of them are for my education. On these types of on this porous surface, is liquid brine a good product to use? Like prior to a storm, you spray the parking area with a liquid brine?
That's a good question, Rick. I'm not sure I know the right answer to that, if it is or not. I've had projects where they use that product, but I'm not all that familiar with it to know well enough if it's appropriate or not.
Well, I think with Robin's last comment about the snow and ice plan, maybe you could do a little bit of investigation on that. Maybe it could be part of the plan.
Agreed.
The second is another education for me on the growth ordinance. Are these on a first come, first serve? So if you have a project that is a phase in and it, for whatever reason, things change, are we locking in 19 and a half now? And when the permit to build the next building is given, the 19 and a half for that one goes? Or are they all given at once? And that may be Jay's bailiwick.
So yeah, growth permits are typically pulled at the same time as building permits. So essentially, as the applicant, they can be pulled beforehand, but a growth permit has an expiration of 6 months. So what we typically see,
okay.
we might expect for this project where we've already heard that, main state financing is already in place and things are, likely to move forward this construction season, then I would anticipate that they would probably seek to pull growth permits at the same time they pull their building permit. They don't have to, but it seems likely. And so yes, that 19 and a half from the reserve pool, if that's the direction which I'm hearing that the board's inclined to go, would be pulled this year. And then the project would be eligible for reserve pool permits when they come back for the second phase, be that, in 2021 or 2025, whatever that year is. And I think that's why I wanted to add that piece for the board to understand and the applicant to understand as well, is we currently do have the 180 reserve pool permits that are left remaining available. But that even if those happen to get drawn down, let's say, again, this takes, a few years for phase 2 to come forward. And, I'm just now going on sort of make-believe time here, that if all the reserve pool permits were pulled, that annually there would always at least be 20 permits in that reserve pool. Again, and just because they are eligible for the reserve pool, they could also ask to pull from the annual allocation. That is, it takes 19 and a half of those units to build one of these. So, I think I answered your question probably a little bit more than you anticipated, but
No, but it's all good. It's all good, Jay. Thank you. I just needed that clarity for me. And then finally, I appreciate the comment on the EV charging. I really would love to see something like Chase has put in, knowing that we're going to have the ability to put those in, especially with this surface that you're doing. You don't want to dig it back up. So I would think that you could strategically find where you've got some light poles in the parking lot where you could have an extra conduit or something like that that's running with it, that you would be able to market. I'm not saying you have to put the chargers in, I understand, but this is a prime demographic for these EVs as they become very, very popular. And it would just, I don't think you really want to start digging into those parking lots after the fact. So I would encourage a placement to be allocated, to be annotated on the plans that say, all right, if we're going to stick them in, we're going to put 2 here and 2 here and be done with it. That's all I have. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Rick. Richter Perry or Rachel, do you have anything to add to this?
I really shouldn't, since I did not hear the presentation by the developer, and I would probably end up asking questions that have already been covered. So I will recuse myself for the rest of this hearing and then come in on the next for the next development.
Thanks, Rachel. Richter Perry, you all set? We're gonna take that as a yes for right now.
I'm muting him.
Okay.
All right, not seeing that's working, so.
All right. Well, that said, we do have a motion that is ready for this. Jamel, if you could pull that up on the screen.
I think Jay's actually going to pull it up because he was.
Yep, I think I
may have
will
worked
do
with it
that.
A little bit.
Okay, can you see that screen now?
Yes, I got it.
Okay. I will just mention that as the conversation has gone, I did make a amendment to one of the conditions around the reserve pool that just simply states the project is eligible for growth permits from the reserve pool in accordance with the growth management ordinance. So I sort of simplified that, and if so I'll leave it to the board to determine how you wish to proceed with that, and I can accept those changes now so it's not confusing later, or we can leave it as is. And
I'm okay with the changes as you've listed it.
so what I'll try to do, just for ease of your reading. Okay.
All right. I move to approve the site plan titled The Uplands as depicted on the plan set prepared by Goral Palmer, dated 6/8/20 with the following findings, waivers, and conditions. The applicant is proposing a multi-phase project that will include the construction of 2 4-story residential buildings. Each proposed building will consist of 39 affordable senior housing units. Affordable housing units address the affordable housing provision of section 20.c.d.13 of the Scarborough zoning ordinance. And in accordance with Chapter 413 Growth Management Ordinance, the board finds the project is eligible for allocation of growth permits from the reserve pool. Proposal also includes parking, stormwater management, infrastructure, and a sidewalk along the property's Scarborough Downs frontage. Proposal is located within lots 5A and 5B within Phase 1 mixed-use residential development at the Downs and will utilize existing frontage along Scarborough Downs Road. Property is located within the Crossroads Plan Development CPD zoning district. Planning board has reviewed the application and supporting documentation and finds that the proposed design of the site plan adequately addresses the site plan review and zoning ordinance requirements for the site utilization and layout, access, internal vehicular movement, parking, pedestrian ways, landscaping, stormwater management, lighting, architecture, signage, utilities, and storage. Waivers: 1, permit the proposed 24-foot parking aisle width instead of the required 25-foot parking aisle width. Conditions: 1, prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall revise the plan set to include A, additional measures related to fire access as required by the fire department, B, a plan note referencing the most recent amended subdivision plan for the Phase 1 mixed residential subdivision within the Downs when available. This shall be reviewed and approved by the planning department. 2, prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall A, pay the traffic impact fees, B, pay the recreation contribution fees at $500 per unit, C, provide the required sidewalk easement documentation for the proposed sidewalk along Scarborough Downs Road, D, execute and record the stormwater maintenance agreement as required by the post-construction stormwater infrastructure management ordinance. E, address the staff review comments relating to stormwater management in the review memo dated 6/22/20, including additional measures added to the best management practices for snow and ice removal plan, provide annual reporting associated with salt usage at the site as part of Chapter 419 reporting to the town to show a decrease in overall usage. This shall be reviewed and approved by the planning department. 3, project is eligible for growth permits from the reserve pool in accordance with subsection 7G of the growth management ordinance. 4, prior to the issuance of a sign permit, the applicant shall provide a final signage plan. This shall be reviewed and approved by the planning department. 5, prior to the start of construction, the applicant shall coordinate the required pre-construction meeting. The meeting shall include the appropriate town staff, the developer, and their site contractor, and is to be coordinated through the planning department. That is the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. We have any discussion? Okay. Seeing none, I will conduct a roll call vote. For the purposes of this, Rachel is still sitting out this item. So Rick Duperry. Come back to Rick. Robin Saunders.
Yes.
Roger Beely.
Yes.
Jen Ladd.
Yes.
Nick McGee, yes. Richter Perry,
He's showing as unmuted. We're still having connection issues.
all right, I'm gonna show that as a 4-0 in the positive. Congratulations and good luck to you.
Thank you so much to the board.
All right,
Thank you very
Good night.
much.
Thank you.
all right. Our next item on tonight's agenda is Commercial Place LLC requests a subdivision amendment for Enterprise Business Park, Assessors Map U39, Lot 47. Just as a quick note, Rachel Hendrickson will become a voting member again and will succeed me if I am dropped off the line in running the meeting. Richter Perry is moved back to the alternate. All right, Jamel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the applicant's proposing a subdivision amendment to split the existing lot 27 at the Enterprise Business Park into two lots, lot 27 and 28. So staff is generally comfortable with the plans as proposed and has provided the board with a draft motion for consideration. Turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jamel. Nick or Jason?
Yes, yep, I'm here. Yeah, this is the easy part of this process. The plans you had before you were sealed by a surveyor and just splitting lots 27 and 28 back to what almost what they originally were way back when it was formally approved and then combined, and then now we're uncombining them. And this would be a necessary step for Mint Salon, which is coming up on the agenda next, to proceed with their project.
All right, we like them short and sweet. Okay. For members of the public, if you are in attendance, you have an opportunity for public comment. If you are here and would like to speak, please use the raise my hand feature on the bottom portion of your screen. All right, seeing none, I'm going to kick discussion over to the board. Any board members have anything to add or a question? Oh, have some nodding heads. Jamel, do you have this motion or is it Angela's turn?
I can share it in a second unless she has it up right now. I got it, Angela. Give me a second. Thank you. You guys see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So I will make a motion to approve the project titled Subdivision Amendment Enterprise Business Park proposed by Commercial Place LLC as depicted on the plan set prepared by Atlantic Resource Consultants dated 3/9/20 with the following findings. The proposed 6th Amendment subdivision plan included the split of the existing lot 27 into two lots, 27 and lot 28. The subdivision is located within the Higas Parkway HP and General Business B3 zoning districts.
Second.
Oh, can you scroll down? Is that it?
Yep.
Yes.
Thanks. I wasn't sure if I was at the end of the screen or the end of the motion.
Sorry about that.
I have a second. Any discussion on this? All right, I'm going to do roll call. Rachel Hendrickson,
Yes.
Robin Saunders,
Yes.
Roger Beely,
Yes.
Jennifer Ladd,
Yes.
Nick McGee. Yes, thank you. I show that as unanimous. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
All right, next item on tonight's agenda is Mint Salon Block LLC requests a site plan review for 800 Technology Way, Assessors Map U39, Lot 4727. Jamel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, this is located in the Enterprise Business Subdivision, located along Technology Way in the Higas Parkway zoning district. The applicant's proposing to construct an 8,240 square foot building that will consist of multiple private personal services spaces along with parking and stormwater elements. As you may recall, several months ago during the sketch plan review, the board did request the building's design include an entrance facing Technology Way, given that the design standards require all buildings to present an inviting human-scaled facade, including entrances that are clearly visible from the street. So staff has continued to recommend this design, given discussion during sketch plan, and suggests that the applicant and the board discuss the proposed building design this evening. Staff has also noted that the zoning standards require a buffer strip of at least 15 feet wide along the street frontage. This buffer shall be designed to separate the site from the street, enhance the visual environment, and screen any parking from the street. So staff has continued to recommend that the applicant include several deciduous tree plantings along the entire frontage to help define the roadway and add some scale. Then the applicant's proposing 76 parking spaces, which is well over the required 29 spaces for a building of this size. So given that the project is located essentially adjacent to the Willowdale Brook watershed, Willowdale Brook, which is listed as threatened by Maine DEP due to increased development in town, staff has recommended the applicant consider eliminating some parking spaces on the site to minimize impervious surfaces. So the board and the applicant should be sure to discuss the amount of parking on the site. At this point, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jamel. And for the applicant, Jason?
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jamel. So just to touch on the couple of things that Jamel was mentioning, I'm going to leave the building design question to Ann Callender, who is the architect and is, I believe, part of this meeting. But we have discussed the planting strip quite vigorously, the applicant and myself and the architect. And the Ann Callender has actually prepared a couple of slides to show you, and she'll go over that a little more. The tough spot here is oops, we had that up there and that went down, is the building envelope is so tight. So our lot, we're really kind of maximizing the use of what is now lot 27. And there's actually there's a ditch that, so the roadway right away, it's not an enclosed drainage structured road. It actually has very wide ditches, and then it has and then a sidewalk. And then, so there's really limited space between where the town maintains the road and the building envelope. So we are proposing to put some plantings in there, but trees just don't have the scale that match the building and would cover up the windows and those types of things. And there'll be a couple of pictures a little further on to kind of reinforce that. And then with regards to the parking, I know that's an issue here. Although the building per square foot per your ordinance only requires 29 spaces, there's actually 40, I believe 44 office individual workers who are scheduled to be there. So Jean Bradshaw, who runs Vince Salon, is the owner. She knows her business intimately. She has 2 of these, and she's really got her pulse, the finger on the pulse of the parking requirements. And during peak hours with exchange, she needs the parking that we have designed. So we could lose a couple spaces, but certainly not an inordinate amount of, like, you know, even 6 spaces would be too many. We could lose a couple with the taking out a few on the dead end parking aisle as well. And then just to cover, I know you got a lot of things tonight, so most of the other engineering-esque comments, I think we typically agree with most of them. We will move the transformer pad to the back of the building, add some parking. We're going to change the fence out. We're going to put, we're actually going to propose one of those granite block fences with the chain connections to them. This actually serves 2 purposes. I think it would look good in that setting. And then also you can remove the chains and get back in there for maintenance, you know, behind the slopes and everything. Very similar to, if any of you have been to Falmouth, the parking center, the shopping center in Falmouth with Shaw's. They have that, like, almost like that naval chain and granite, you know, the granite piers. So we've talked about that and think that'd be a nice touch. I think that's generally pretty much all the big items. I'll let Ann tackle the hard ones with the building and such.
Hi there. Could I share my screen instead of,
Yep.
it seems like these slides are kind of not showing up quite as well. Let's see. I'll just quickly play this. This is an image of, I just wanted to sort of walk you through quickly the site context and our building design concept. Hair salon or salon block is a co-sharing workspace. As Jason said, there will be 34 suites in this building. This is images of Jean Bradshaw's current facility in Falmouth. And they're renting out these as individual professionals and Jean manages the building, provides reception and scheduling. So, see if I can do this. So Technology Way is, as you know, is located off of Enterprise Drive, deep into the Enterprise Office Park. The majority of the developments buildings are positioned along their front yard setbacks, and as recommended on page 2 of the town design standards, general site planning principles. And our site is back here, and the closest ones are Katahdin Analytical and I'm forgetting the name of this other building across the street. But as you see, both are directly across the street from each other. They're both located right off their, right on the property line setbacks, front yard setbacks. And they've established a really strong street presence as you drive down this road. So these are the most adjacent buildings, and ours is just beyond this driveway here. Some other looks at it. There is one property that is set back, and this, this is sort of the COVID look right now. The parking is unoccupied, but I think it was important to us to not be putting parking in front of the building at the street and continue this straight edge. So this, where I've located a building corner, there's a stake in the ground at the moment where we think the building will be placed. We're lining it up with Katahdin Analytical, so it's sort of a continuation. And as Jason said, there really isn't a lot of space here for street trees. So it looks like there is more than it is on the site plan, but really close to this drainage ditch. In our last meeting, we discussed, I should go back one. We'd had our entrance pretty close to where this building location is, and it was across from this passageway. And there was concern that there would be this cross traffic that could cause problems. So we have moved our location further down the site, and we're sort of reverse what we're looking at. We wanted not only do we sort of want to maintain the street edge to keep this continuity with Katahdin, but we wanted our building to be L-shaped so we can maximize windows for all the salons and centralize the reception and building component elevations on the inside corner. This makes our internal circulation work best for access to the individual suites with shorter corridors, allowing the clients to disperse into multiple directions. So this is actually a little video sort of coming down. So as you can see, all the windows are fairly similar, so that all the suites have great visibility, light, and views, so making it a very desirable space to work in. The design guidelines objective for building facades are to present inviting human scale facades to the street, internal drives, parking areas, and surrounding neighborhoods. It also states, wherever possible, entrances should be clearly visible to the street and reinforced through site and architectural features. I think we've fulfilled these objectives as our objection. Sorry, can't speak. As our building is very friendly, has a very friendly building facade with inspiration taken from New England traditional architecture with generous overhangs, large scale windows, appropriately scaled siding, signage, and lighting elements. We felt that wherever possible caveat allowed us some poetic license to orient the building entry to where it was most visible from the parking area and allowed for direct access to where clientele would be parking. We felt that the majority of our clients would be arriving by car, and we didn't want to create or lose a rental room to create a false front door or confuse the public on where they should enter. We felt it was important to keep the street edge of the building and not sort of push it back on the site. There was a discussion of sort of flipping this plan and so that you could see the entrance from the street. But if we switch it around, then we would have sort of less building edge at the street. And then we'd be surrounded by parking. So we really wanted to give the people who have these suites some buffer from the parking and from car. So the cars come right up against the building. So this really minimized how the car would interact with the building and gives the suites a lot more views out into landscaped areas. The driveway and the sign direct you to where the parking is, and the entry is clearly defined where you expect it to be. So we hope that you agree with this interpretation for this location. Thank you.
Is that all for the presentation, Jason?
Yep, I think that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And oops, just one more quick thing, Nick. I would add that we do, Jamel is right, we do need a waiver for, maybe we're not at that point yet, but we're reducing the aisle width down to 25 feet. Given that we don't get a lot of heavy commercial traffic here, it's mostly passenger traffic. It's more than sufficient to serve the parking lot. And I think by ordinance, you have to be 26 to 30 for commercial use in this park. So that is one waiver that would have to be hanging out there.
Thank you. All right, we have an opportunity for public comment on this item. If there's anyone here in attendance that would like to speak on this item, please click the raise my hand feature on the bottom right corner of your Zoom meeting info. All right, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and turn it over to the board. Rachel, do you want to go first?
Sure. I really appreciate the visuals. I think that's in terms of architecture, that's kind of exciting, especially the indoor. I appreciate the concept of setting up a type of work share space, co-share. I think that's where a lot of our smaller entrepreneurs are going, and it's great that you've got that going for the beauty industry. We did ask that you try to play Tetris, I guess is the best way to say it, with the building. In other words, to rotate it 90 degrees and then 180 degrees to see if there was any possible way within that site that the entranceway would be visible. So while I appreciate the effort that you've made on the front to add the visual interest along the street, that still to me doesn't meet the design standards. And we did ask you to try a couple of different ways of aligning the building so that the entrance is visible to the street. That would allow us perhaps at some point to say, you're right, it's not going to work. Or it might allow you to say, oh, well, this is a possibility that I would like to pursue. So I urge you to do that and come back to us and show us what some of the options are. I think along with the change in the building can come a discussion of the number of parking spaces. I understand that at peak times, all of these spaces would be filled, and that might be, before New Year's and Christmas and holidays when everybody, proms and other things, if we ever actually get back to having those in person. But for most of the time, we're simply not going to be there, and that's a site that abuts the Willowdale, and I do have concerns about the number of spaces that you're requesting. Again, I like the design, I like the concept of the building, but I really would appreciate if you would listen to us about the siting of the building. I noticed that the electrical lines are overhead. So while the staff is interested in seeing more street trees, as am I, I'm just not clear how they would fit in with the overhead electrical lines. So at some point, I'd like somebody to help us take a look at that, or help me take a look at it, to determine if that's the way to go with street trees, or if it is the way to go with a really enhanced planting in the front, with some plantings that reach 4 or 5 feet, but certainly not as high as the street trees might be. So I would appreciate it if you could come back to us with that. And that's what I've got. Thank you.
Rachel. Jen?
I guess I would echo the Rachel's comments on in general, but in particular with regard to the parking, and if it's, and I don't mean to say that as I don't mean, you know, any discredit to the building owner in terms of this. So this is kind of a unique business approach here, not something that was probably considered maybe when looking at this, a parking rate here, but maybe just a little bit more justification to help us understand how the layout of this building, the hours maybe might help justify such a huge addition of parking spaces, and any other thought or maybe creative approach to parking sharing here, I guess, just to try and limit the area of imperviousness in such a sensitive area. I do, sorry, on the architecturals, I do understand, you know, the ordinance and the comment. I do think it would be helpful to see an additional iteration or rendering of what this building position might look like elsewhere on the site. But it's also a little bit, as I was listening to the presentation, I was just kind of taking a virtual drive down the street here and just looking at what some of the other buildings look like. Some of them I do think do a little bit better job orienting entrances towards the street, but not all of them for sure. And I definitely appreciate the effort put into the shape of the building and trying to provide as much natural light and windows for the spaces inside. So I guess I would like to see another option there as well, but I also agree that the location of this property and probably the clientele and operations that will be happening here generally lend themselves to vehicle traffic here, from which would be, you know, the bulk of the area to park here does sort of seem to be at the back. That's all that I have right now.
Thanks, Jen. Robin?
I was wondering if the applicants can speak to what is proposed instead of trees in order to meet the buffering and screening standards.
Yep. Nick, you want me to jump in and take that, or?
Yes, please.
Yep. Jamel, do you have the landscape plan handy right on your computer? And I'll talk while you're looking. So there are plantings out front now. They are, and maybe you'll remember what they are. I'm terrible with plants. I'm some site engineer. But they're a flowering
Hydrangea
hydrangeas. Yeah, very good.
and daylilies, so
Yep.
they'll grow to about 3 to 4 feet tall.
Yep.
Go on
And
the-
they're placed so that they fall sort of in between windows, so you get a good look at those windows that Ann has got in there. They're pretty tall windows that let in quite a bit of light, and then the plantings kind of pop up between the windows along the frontage.
Are you planning to maintain, I know that there's a fairly large amount of the parcel that will not be developed. Will those trees be untouched? Meaning, would you put up limits of construction to make sure that any remaining, forest stand is untouched during construction?
Yes, Robin. That's actually the stream buffer. So that tree shown on the plan that Jamel has up there now,
Yep.
we actually have to put a small retaining. It's not a small retaining wall. There's a retaining wall off the end of the parking lot.
Toward the back where the grade gets steep?
Yeah. And so, and maybe if I can just kind of bend this back a little bit on discussion of the building. So I know probably it doesn't mean a whole lot for me to say this, but we did try moving this building around a number of times. We essentially mirrored the building sort of diagonally across the parking lot, so that that sort of the inside corner of the L was facing Technology Way, and then all the parking was essentially in front of the building, sort of that layout. And that just that required some significant, because of the number of parking spaces we need, and I'll speak to that in a second. Really, this is kind of the only layout that works for this lot. And I guess the question could be asked, could we have gotten more land off of what is now lot 28? And that we really pushed the limits with the developer or owner, Mr. David Miley, on this, because lot 28 is just big enough for another building of similar size and certainly less parking. I think that the parking sharing idea is a great idea. And we even discussed this, but it wouldn't make sense to share with Katahdin Analytical because of their building is sort of, their parking lot is quite a ways away from our parking lot, because their building is kind of kitty cornered up to ours. But lot 28, that could be an item for discussion. Obviously not having someone developing it yet. Obviously we can't make any kind of promises there, but would be a good form of discussion. But Jean Bradshaw reminded me that if she has 34 employees in there, and that's 34 lessees, she also provides a couple of, like a receptionist, and then people are in there, doing maintenance and cleaning. I mean, we're talking, at a peak time or in a given day, there may be 34 employee cars that are in that parking lot. So then if they all have appointments, even if they don't have appointments at the same time, there is some overlap. That the parking is really, Jean would be very uncomfortable with sort of any less parking.
Yeah,
So
and I
what
can understand the model too, Jason, where each employee also has a client, potentially who's coming in.
Yes.
And there are times when that client is getting ready to leave and the next client is coming in. So I understand about the demand, and I think everyone understands about the demand for it. But it's, what are we going to do to basically mitigate the impacts of all this impervious? And so
what we've done is we actually put the stormwater in the ground. So what you see is a subsurface chamber system that's in there, and these actually work pretty well because you're not going to get a whole lot of export of any kind of sediment. And we've talked about sort of the salt management plan that you're talking about over there on the downs. same here. We've even considered putting heated walkways in to sort of reduce the amount of salt and sediment that you're going to see on the walkway side. So, you know, that's a chamber system that has inspection ports. Anything that gets in there, unless it's highly, you know, it goes through a sand filter. So unless it's very, very fine in suspension, I actually think these types of stormwater systems are the best kind of filtration you can get for a site like this. They're expensive to put in, but because Jean really wants to be in this area with this scale of business, she's willing to, you know, pay top dollar to put, you know, a top-notch engineered system to clean stormwater.
And I
And it's
certainly
also under
appreciate
DEP.
that.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of heading where I was going to head next as far as the pond is considered. But Jason, can you speak to what portion of the site will remain undeveloped? That vegetation being, is there
So
a portion?
it's about 50 to 55% of the site will be untouched. So
Okay.
yeah, so you've got 100-foot, and that's actually a 100-foot buffer, not a 75-foot buffer. So you have.
So can you show us, on that plan then, the salon owns only behind the parking lot. It doesn't own to the right of the parking lot on that
Correct.
plan we were
Yep.
just looking at.
It's,
Okay.
it's kind of like a long, narrow,
Alley almost, okay.
the previous plan, the previous agenda item. So yeah, that you can see if you can see the property lines are the black dash lines.
Yep, okay. Yeah, so, gosh, this is a tough one because I think this would be a fabulous place and to put this, and I think it's a fabulous business idea. And we're so thrilled that Jean Bradshaw is considering Scarborough. But I think we've got a little ways to go in our back and forth together. And I just can't I can't emphasize enough how important it would be for the applicant to provide an inspection of the existing system, especially knowing that, what is it that it says on the peer review memo, that the existing pond is an enforcement issue with at least 3 members. So, you know, the having the existing inspection of existing conditions could potentially protect Jean Bradshaw from any further enforcement actions moving forward in there. So I can't stress that enough. And Jason, I think that what you are doing with stormwater management is incredible. I like your little Ben Viola table there that you have in the back, you know, showing all of your water quality calculations, because it looks like you are treating 100% of the site.
Yep.
But maybe we need to show a treatment train. Maybe we need to show that you're having multiple layers of water quality controls.
Well, I mean, so we're meeting the standards for main DEP and as far as I understand the town to, like you said, the 100% treatment level. There is no standard for treating 110%.
But we can increase that 0.4 inches. We can increase that, what is it, 40% of developed area? I mean, you know, this is right on the edge of Willowdale Brook here, and it's impaired for development.
I think you might be mixing standards. So
am I? Okay.
Yeah. So 40%. 40% would not meet standards. So we're actually treating 100% of the impervious surface, and probably like 90% of total developed area, which is your impervious surface, and anything else that you touch that becomes vegetation.
Got it.
So So, and we're treating it to the standard that, you know, the first 1 inch of stormwater that hits the site typically flushes 95% of the pollutants into the system. So we couldn't, to be honest with you, I don't know that I could treat more. I could treat deeper, but there's no standard for that. And there's really not any science that says that that does any good.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so don't get caught up in the demand. I mean, we get the demand that is needed for this business model. But I think it's just making it fit and selling it, considering the threat of the watershed here. And I'm sorry, I can't give you any more insight there, but
So I do want to touch on, so the enforcement issue you're talking about, actually, this is kind of the first maybe understanding it. So there is a pond that's within Technology Way. It's down at the corner at Enterprise Drive and Technology Way. That pond is a 20-year-old, 18-year-old old suspended solids pond, so wet pond. I think it would be unfair for Gene to be on the hook for the inspection of that because it's a shared cost within the whole development. To the sense that the DEP or the town of Scarborough would like that pond inspected. To be honest with you, I'd love to do it, but I think we could probably find a way where that cost is absorbed by you know, the property, you know, the developer, I tend to say, or something to do. So that's something that we'll follow up with the town with to see, you know, what makes sense, and we'll include the DEP in that discussion. But for the purposes of this specific project, I think that kind of falls outside of, you know, what Gene's responsibility is.
and I'm thinking from a liability and legal standpoint, Jason, that she could protect herself from future liability, but I'll definitely let you and the town sort of go back and forth with that. Can you provide us what the is that granite with the chain that you were talking about, the alternative fencing?
Yes.
That you were considering? Okay.
Yep. No more chain link.
Okay, good. Yeah, I can't give you any more sort of brainstorming, but I know that you will get this. You will crack this nut because this is too good of a project to not have it move forward. So
well,
that's
I mean,
all
my
have.
sense is, I mean, we'll hear from a couple other members, is that we're really just kind of lacking an entrance on the front. I mean, is that kind of where we're at? And I guess we'll let other people speak, and then we can kind of figure all that out.
All right. I'll let you talk about it with the others. I'm done, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Robin. Who wants to go next? Roger?
Sure. Couple of things. I don't have a problem with the position of the building right now in the design. I actually drove down that site, that business park, about a week ago, and it's kind of interesting because all the buildings in that whole development are really nice buildings, but the landscaping is, you know, it leaves a little bit to be desired because it's not as aggressive or robust, I should say, as some of the newer parks. For instance, in front of the building, the one in lot 26, what's it, Katahdin? Is it Katahdin? That there's very little landscaping in front of that. There's no trees at all along the road. So it's kind of a mixed bag on that. I think the landscaping that was presented to us, the landscaping plan, along with the building architecture and everything, I think that looks really, really good. I would prefer to have the building situated the way it is now, with the parking in the back instead of a lot of parking in the front. Now, pertaining to the parking, I tend to lean towards the operator of the business. Especially where they have other businesses, they probably have a pretty good handle on what they need for parking. And we certainly don't want people parking out on the street. So I tend to lean with the operators of the business. Um, I, I like to think that they're not going to put in more parking than they need. So one question I have for Jason is, did you consider porous pavement at all?
Yeah, actually we did. We did, and we talked about it. Actually, we have a little experience with that. There's a site in South Portland, the DHHS site by the airport. Pervious parking is pavement is personally, I don't think you get the same treatment level that you'd get from the system that we're proposing. Our system is a sand filter and in subsurface chambers, Roger, and that it's actually more expensive than putting in pervious pavement, but pervious pavement also tends to become a little bit of what I call an Oreo cookie, in that it can crumble and it gets it doesn't have the strength that that regular pavement does, obviously because of the void space and the lack of the material changes in particle size that sort of binds it together. So typically, a pervious pavement is used, I think, in much larger applications, kind of like you see in South Portland, like large parking lots where the volume of stormwater you need to treat is hard to reach. But with this, this site is, less than, 3/4 of an acre of impervious area that we can get that in a small unit that's easy to maintain and easier to get the treatment out of. So we did think about it though.
Okay, good. Just to quickly go back to the location of the building. If you do drive down into that business park, the entrances to the buildings are, I think there's very few that have actually an entrance right on Technology Way or the other entrance coming in. They're all on the side or something. Now this one is obviously hidden, but it's pretty obvious to anybody driving in there where the entrance is going to be. It's going to be, there's only one way to get in. So, and I think the building, actually, the way the building is presented to us, it's going to be one of the more attractive looking buildings in that whole development. So, the staff talked about trees along the Technology Way. I'm not wedded to that because I don't see it on other properties. You would have some trees there, and then the property next door, there's no trees. So I'm not wedded to that at all. So let's see. That I guess I'll leave it at that right now. But you can put me down as somebody who's fine with the location of the building and okay with the parking. I'm all set. Thanks.
Thanks, Roger. Rick Manking, go ahead.
Thanks. I just have three points. On the fixture schedule, your UCS fixtures, which are your downlights that are in the areas of your entrance, you've blocked off the 35K and the 51K, and I'm just wondering if you intend on using both colors or if you're going to go with a lower temperature scale to kind of go along with what your parking lot light colors will be, because those are at 3000K. So that's one point. In terms of the position of the building, I really like the solar on it. I'd like you to speak a little bit about that. I didn't see anything in the narrative about the capacity and all of that. I did notice that you're doing it halfway on the roof, and the position of the building gives you that long length. So I'm in favor of that. And I don't think I would be too, I think the entrance would speak for itself as you drive into the parking spaces. But that brings me up to the parking spaces with the extra, and I agree. I mean, we look at fitness centers and those kind of hospitality type sectors, and those tend to have kind of sporadic parking needs, and you certainly have to make a balance between what is too much, what is right, and what's not going to be enough. And I tend to go with what the applicant, who has the experience in knowing the clientele and the habits of those folks. So I would be okay with the number of parking spots, but I'd really like you to also consider some EVs for those folks that are coming in that are going to be your staff, or that are renting, that are going to be there 6 or 7 hours possibly, and maybe have an opportunity to have electronic vehicles and charge them there. So those are my 3 points. But in your narrative next time, could you talk a little bit more about the solar? And you did mention maybe heated sidewalks to help with the ice and the snow control. And you do have extra roof space if you wanted to do some solar thermal and maybe have a reservoir of some lukewarm water, and you could definitely do something with the sidewalks in that fashion. So that's my comments, Mr. Chair. But I'd be in favor of the position and the parking as applicant needs.
All right, so I want to quickly just I want to do some straw polling because we need to give clear direction to applicant and staff on how they're going to proceed from here. So who, I'm going to ask, just kind of go through the questions. Who's in favor of the waiver for the aisle width? Okay. Who's in favor of the with the building design as it's presented here?
Nick, when you say building design, do you mean the orientation or the actual building?
I'll go with the orientation with the lack of a street entrance.
Okay.
So that's clarified. I'm okay with what I see here. Okay, so it's 3 of 4. Okay. And then buffering and street trees. Who wants to see that go in? I do. Okay, I show that as 3, 4, 5. Okay, see some buffering and street trees going in. And then who's comfortable with the proposed amount of parking? Okay, I've got 3, 4, 4, 5. Okay, so I think, did I miss anything either to staff or the applicant on this as far as direction on these items?
Nick, I think staff's is going to probably continue to have the comment about inspecting the pond. I think it's maybe getting confused a little bit with us expecting them to come in and do work in the pond or retrofit the pond or anything like that. It's really, as I think Robin had brought up, kind of considering a baseline so that as any enforcement actions that do happen out there, if there is lack of maintenance, really protects this new developer coming in and not get blamed for the sins of the past. And I'm not, I guess I shouldn't suggest that nothing's been happening out there because I don't know. But just in case, I guess I think staff's going to continue to have the comment about asking for an inspection.
Thanks, Angela. Jason, I believe I heard you say, given the board's support of your proposal here, that you were going to be more than happy to work with staff on that particular issue. Is that what I heard you say earlier?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'll put on a pair of waders and go out there tomorrow if you want. I mean, I'm glad to get a question I can answer instead of the ones that Rick asked me about EVs and solar panels that I'm not even qualified to listen to. But yeah, we'll take care of the pond. And we do work for David Miley, and so and we work well with the DEP. So we'll sniff it out and find out what's going on. So yeah, we'll take care of that.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions or comments from board on this matter? Yes, Rachel.
Yeah, I reiterate my desire to see alternative sightings because we don't know what might be the possibility. We've only been presented with one. And at the last meeting, we were really clear that we wanted to see some alternatives, and nothing basically has been brought before us except for more plantings in front. So I would like to see the alternative sightings. I understand where the board is going, but that is my request, that I see those sightings. That's what I asked for last time, what I asked for this time.
Jason, do you think there is a possibility of you putting together a alternate sighting rough out sketch for this?
Yeah. I mean,
It was a request from that last meeting.
yep. No, it's
Rachel
and
is correct.
we did do the exercises. So I'll bring you the carcasses. Yeah. It's not that. Yeah. It's probably on me that we didn't put in some sort of narrative about that with some images as well. So yeah, we'll bring that over.
Thank you, Jason. Any other questions or comments from this board? Okay, so we will see you again probably in a few weeks.
Yep. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jason. Our next item tonight is Oak Hill Senior Housing LP requests a preliminary subdivision and site plan review as part of a planned development project for 41 Little Dolphin Drive, Assessors Map U45, Lot 4A. Jamel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as you may recall, this project's located on the TBC zoning district at the intersection of Access Road and Little Dolphin Drive. So the applicant did receive master plan approval for the project back in early June. And during that process, the board also waived the maximum setback requirement for the building as allowed in the zoning ordinance. So the applicant's before you this evening proposing to construct a approximately 50,000 square foot 3-story building. It will consist of 60 affordable 1-bedroom senior housing units. As noted in the review memos from staff and the civil peer reviewer, there are some questions in regards to the proposed development and its relationship with the parcel located directly to the west that was also approved as part of the master plan. The board will need to find that the proposed development can function as a standalone project and meet all the relevant standards in the zoning and site plan ordinance. So staff did include some specific comments in regards to the delineation of the proposed driveway, parking area, the design of the dead end parking area, ensuring adequate civilization on the adjacent parcel, and any easements that may be necessary for the proposed stormwater treatment facilities and other utilities. So the board and the applicant should be sure to discuss kind of how these sites will relate to this evening. And staff has also noted that the zoning ordinance requires all planned developments within the TBC to be designed with pedestrian and placemaking elements that reinforce a town or village center. So staff has suggested some additional street trees, seating areas, and really look to coordinate with the owners of the Hannaford Shopping Plaza to formalize a possible direct pedestrian connection, given that this is likely a likely destination for future residents on the site. And the applicant did provide building plans with elevations and renderings. The applicant should be prepared to discuss the design this evening with the board. And at this point, I think Angela would like to add a few comments about the proposed stormwater treatment system. Thanks.
Staff had made some comments in the memo about the stormwater modeling. It's been, I think, for this project simplified, which on the surface is fine. However, there are 2 outfalls along the, I guess, the northerly property line that are right at the abutting property line. And so it would be nice to have some more detail around that analysis to make sure we really understand the impacts of the downstream property owners affected or not affected for that matter. And the board is aware we have received comment from that property owner. And so I think with that kind of reinforcing the fact that we really just need to have all the information. So I would request that we do a little more detailed analysis and modeling of the stormwater system.
All right. So we have for the applicant, Sam or Dan, who's up today?
I think actually Brooks Moore from South Portland Development Corp is going to introduce the project, and then Sam would take it from there.
Hey, Brooks.
All right, is my screen all set to go for you, Brooks?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah, so members of the board, thanks for taking us up tonight. I'm the Director of Development for the South Portland Housing Authority and its nonprofit development arm, the South Portland Housing Development Corp. I know you've seen this project a couple of times now, but I know that I also haven't spoken, and so just thought I would take just a moment to introduce our organization, especially because we get a lot of questions about how we're related or not related to the city of South Portland. So the Housing Authority and its development corporation was founded by the city of South Portland. The city council appoints the board members, but beyond that, it's a separate quasi-municipal entity. The Housing Authority and the Development Corp jointly own about 700 apartments, all affordable. We also manage 2 properties for the Biddeford Housing Authority. So as a separate entity and with its own development arm, we're not, while we're formed by the city of South Portland, we're not affiliated directly with the city, and we provide services not only within the South Portland municipal boundaries, but also in adjoining communities. So with that said, we're a nonprofit, we're mission driven, and we develop the properties and we own them for the long term. So I believe the Housing Authority has been around since the 1940s. We're excited about partnering with M&R on this project. We think it's a really ideal location for senior housing. In particular, its proximity to Hannaford, to banking services, to retail, and to public transportation, and a really good and evolving pedestrian network in Oak Hill. And really feel that the combination of those and then adding more residential housing and more office use expands the city's vision through its comp plan. And I would add also, it looks like, and we'll be meeting with the Scarborough Housing Alliance soon, that we're, along with other projects, really trying to push the needle or move the needle on providing and supporting Scarborough's goal for new affordable housing. So with that, I don't need to go into any more, and I'll turn it over to Sam to go through the technical features.
Thanks, Brooks. Good evening. My name is Sam LeBeau with Acorn Engineering. We're the civil engineer on the project. Thank you all for your time tonight. As Jamel mentioned, you may remember this, the beginning of this project came in the form of a 3-phase plan development. The site inventory and master plan phases were for the overall 7.5 acre site with a lot split. The senior housing portion is before you tonight. We are seeking preliminary subdivision approval, and the adjacent office lot would be subject to its own site plan review at a later date. So looking at the overall context, the site is shown in red here, with the north at the top right of the page. Little Dolphin Drive, which would provide primary access to the site, is located off Route 1 in the Oak Hill neighborhood. To the immediate west, we have the Hannaford Shopping Plaza as well as Gorham Road. To the south, we have a multitude of eateries, retailers, and offices fronting Route 1. To the east, a number of single families are along Maple Avenue. And to the north, Foley Farm Road turns into a private drive, extends to the single family home, and then you have quite a bit of undeveloped area surrounding the house. The site is in and mostly surrounded by the Town Village Center or TVC district, except to the northeast where you have the R2 district. Currently, the site is vacant with sustained slopes to the rear at an average grade of 6%. Nearly 2 acres of wetlands exist on site with no vernal pools or other natural resources identified. So zooming in, you can see the site falls in between Foley Farm Road, Little Dolphin Drive, and what's currently referred to as Access Road. Across the way is the Town and Country Credit Union, and what I have in blue is the Phase 2 portion of the overall master plan. So focusing in a little further on the subject site, in brown is the footprint of the proposed 3-story building, which is comprised of 60 affordable 1-bedroom apartments. This leverages the density incentives for affordable housing as outlined within the zoning ordinance. So very pleased to take advantage of that opportunity and create much needed housing. Consistent with the master plan, we've located this building to the northeast where it can take advantage of the natural buffers while also being situated to the residential neighbors. To that point, we are proposing a significant side setback along this edge, over 120 feet, which includes the preservation of this 25-foot wide existing tree line. At the front of the building, we've created a small plaza area, which will allow for drop-offs directly at the main entrance. The circulation would then include looping around this main landscape island and heading back towards Little Dolphin Drive. At the bottom edge of the building, we have proposed a 16-foot wide emergency lane in coordination with the fire department. And the 16 feet is unique in that it's comprised of the 5-foot paved sidewalk you see in gray, as well as 11 feet of a pervious structural grass system. And this design was really aimed with the intent to cut down the impervious area and provide more of a natural condition adjacent to these 2 acres of preserved wetlands, while also maintaining the means necessary for emergency access. The site itself is navigable for a 40-foot fire truck, and the emergency lane would allow for that same truck to either front in or back in. The parking was laid out to provide 1 space per apartment as required by the ordinance, with another 4 guest spaces, bringing the total parking count to 64. Additionally, bicycle storage will be provided on site. Regarding solid waste, the building will have a dedicated room where trash and recycling can be wheeled out using the side path at the top of the page here, and ultimately will be removed by a private hauler. All respective utility companies have been coordinated with, as well as Portland Water District and the Sanitary District. We are proposing to extend overhead electric and communications from around the Town and Country driveway to the Little Dolphin and Access Road intersection. From there, those lines would drop underground and serve the site, as well as a pad-mounted transformer on the side of the building. The project will also take advantage of existing subsurface utilities within Little Dolphin Drive. Natural gas will be tapped off the main and brought to the bottom left-hand corner of the building. A 4-inch domestic water line will feed the building, and a 6-inch fire line will serve the sprinkler system, as well as an internal hydrant located centrally. Lastly, sewer will be routed via gravity to the existing main. Regarding stormwater, the entirety of the existing site starts at a high point from Access Road and flows north towards these undeveloped woodlands. The majority of this runoff enters into a natural wooded swale that bypasses the existing single family and finds its way to the Gorham Road wetlands and eventually Millbrook. For the proposed conditions, the entire site, including the office lot, was considered in tandem to provide a comprehensive design. Rather than looking at each lot individually, we felt it was more appropriate and best practice to consider the entire watershed and how the two sites would eventually interact with each other from a grading and drainage perspective. So our approach to the stormwater management was to provide detention and treatment as close to the source as possible. This is demonstrated in the roof drip line BMP that wraps around the building, as well as a rain garden on each side of the building. Collectively, these 3 BMPs will be incorporated into the landscape program and handle the entirety of the roof runoff. At the very back of the site, we have 2 vegetated soil filters. These systems will do the heavy lifting for the treatment and attenuation by collecting the parking lot runoff. As the final discharge points, we have provided 2 level lip spreaders, and these have actually been oversized. And this technique allows us to avoid any channelized flow and instead mimic the existing conditions. Further, these 2 spreaders have been pushed to the northeast as much as possible. And as a result, the discharge will route the stormwater and maintain as much distance from the existing single family as possible. The site runoff will end up in the wetlands along Gorham Road as it currently does, and then will eventually outlet to Millbrook. Regarding the modeling and Angela's comments, I believe we provided all that information in the submission, but I'm happy to talk directly offline or provide anything else that's requested. Overall, we feel the proposed drainage plan is robust and really takes advantage of those low impact development techniques. As such, the peak flows in the post-development are actually anticipated to be lower than the existing flows. We submitted the stormwater permit application to the Maine DEP in early April, where it was found to meet all requirements, and accordingly, we received approval 10 days ago. As far as phasing goes, we are proposing to build up the site and stabilize the adjacent lot with gravel, which would include installation of the majority of the stormwater infrastructure, and would of course be subject to a shared maintenance agreement. Lastly, with regards to transportation, here's a quick graphic from the master plan phase that demonstrates the proximity of the site to established businesses and bus stops, as well as the proposed connection to existing sidewalks. So in general, residents will have the opportunity to utilize all 3 roadways and their existing sidewalks to get to the Route 1 corridor, where there's a plethora of goods and services. And with that, I'll hand it off to Tom Marico to discuss the traffic component, and happy to answer any questions afterwards.
Sam.
Good evening. My name is Tom Marico. I'm a senior associate at T. Wyland International based in Falmouth, and I'm the project's traffic engineer. And so I'll be brief. In your packet, there is a traffic assessment that looked at trip generation, safety conditions, and pedestrian facilities in proximity to the site. From a traffic perspective, this is a very low generating type of use. We would expect about 12 vehicles to be generated to and from the site during the morning peak hour. And that's roughly 1 vehicle every 5 minutes. So really an infrequent sort of trip generator. And then in the evening commuter peak hour, we would expect about 17 vehicles, 9 entering and 8 exiting in that 1 hour. So again, very low generator, not expected to cause any mobility, congestion, safety problems in that area. Related to that is that the site has really afforded really good access opportunities. Certainly Little Dolphin Drive will be the main access into and out of the site, but there are opportunities to utilize Access Drive and Foley Farm Road to access Hannaford Drive to either go to Gorham Road to the west or to utilize the signal at Route 1 to gain access in a very safe, easy way. So really a great site from an access perspective in and out. Foley Farm Road, Access Drive, and Little Dolphin Road have been built to town standards. So from a design perspective, they're in very good shape. And then from a pedestrian perspective, there are currently sidewalks that are available within the area that allow pedestrians from the site to walk to the destinations in the area. So really nice use. The town's consultant traffic engineer has asked us to kind of do an evaluation of those facilities, and we'll do that in the near future to evaluate any needs for pavement markings for crosswalks or ADA compliance needs on those existing facilities. From a safety perspective, there were no crashes at Little Dolphin Drive and Route 1. There was one high crash location per MDOT criteria on Route 1 from Hannaford Drive to Down East Lane. We just received DOT crash data for that high crash location, and we're currently reviewing that information and we'll report back to the board and the town after that. So that's a brief summary. Happy to answer any questions as you deliberate.
I appreciate it. All right, is that all for the applicant's team? Yeah, all right. I'm going to turn this over for public comment this evening. If you were here in attendance and would like to speak on this issue, please use the raise my hand feature located on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen.
Hello,
Hi.
my name's Evan Carroll. I'm not sure if I was slated to speak still. I thought I was waiting for Nick to go, but perhaps I'll just speak about the architecture real quick.
Sure.
If that's all right.
Yes, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. My name is Evan Carroll. I'm with Build Architecture, working with Brooks and South Portland Housing Development. And thank you all for coming out for my birthday this evening. We have, as you can see in the rendering, we have taken sort of a front porch approach to the front of the building. We have a canopy that comes out to the drop-off area, but also the canopy leads into a sheltered, both in terms of roof as well as vegetative plantings, sheltered area right in front of the lounge. We can probably go to the first floor plan, Sam. So this is the main floor of the building, and I'll be brief because I think moving right along would be fine. On the left-hand side of the building, right above where it says first floor, you can see the columns for the canopy, as well as the porch area. Directly behind that is the vestibule and the lobby. And something that isn't always possible in tax credit buildings in particular, we have some sort of through circulation so that the lounge connects to a living area, which connects to an outdoor area in the back of the building. And all of that is kind of ideal for residents to have a more public side of outdoor space and a more private side of outdoor space. Beyond that L, which has a lot of the public functions, then we basically have units going down to the more residential, down to the back end of the building, which is also the where we're closest to the single family homes. So it's consistent use wise as well. A little bit more about the architecture. We're utilizing clapboard siding, bay windows, and rectangular portrait-oriented windows, which is all typical for New England style architecture. And I think that's it for me. Thank you for having us out tonight.
Thanks, Evan. Happy birthday.
If I could add just one thing about the architecture, we've got another project that's underway in South Portland, where we are working with Revision Energy and putting solar panels on the roof, photovoltaic. We'll be planning to the same.
Brooks, did we lose you? Or was it on my connection?
No, it's probably my connection. Too many users in one house. I was just saying that we typically try to do solar panels on the roof. We're doing that on a project that's starting construction in South Portland right now, and we'll be proposing to do the same thing on this building.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the applicant's team? All right. I'm going to turn it back over to the public. If you're here to speak on this item, please just click the raise my hand function and we will dial you in. All right, I don't see any public comment here this evening. We did receive a letter from the abutter, regarding stormwater concerns. This time I'll turn it back over to the board and let's see, Jennifer, do you want to start us off tonight?
Sure. Great. Tom, I'm curious if the data, the accident data that you got from DOT included pedestrian crashes or just vehicular crashes, and if that was included, I missed it and I apologize.
It includes vehicular crashes, pedestrian crashes, and bicycle crashes. So all of the above. When I looked at it, there were no pedestrian or bicycle crashes in that high crash location segment.
Weird. Do you know what the date ranges are? Anyway, I know that there was a pedestrian fatality at the end of this road in the last 10 years, maybe. And other incidents there further back that I know less about, so I'm not going to speak to them in particular. But anyway, so I was just curious whether or not that popped up. It sounds like it didn't come up, which I think is interesting. But in terms of your project in particular, again, making a wide generalization, I think probably the history of pedestrian problems on Route 1 there probably have to do with people crossing from the other side onto this side. So you're sort of at an advantage there. But definitely appreciate the efforts that this project has gone to and looking at the potential for pedestrian connectivity here for this project. I think it's great. So I look forward to the adjacent inventory that you'll do for pedestrian facilities adjacent to this site. And just as a side note, I feel like that information would be helpful for the town to roll into the there's an Oak Hill pedestrian study that was done a while back, so that might be like a helpful update for that, even if you're just looking at a small piece of it. Just would want to make sure that any improvements that were made between this property and the Hannaford property were at the very least ADA compliant, or perhaps even more so, maybe a little bit wider or a little bit lesser grade. I think there is kind of if I remember, I've only been back there a couple times, but if I remember correctly, there's a little bit of a grade change between the Foley Farm Road and the Hannaford property. I don't know if you've spoken with them at all about how amenable they would be to making a connection like that, but I can just see how, technically a connection could be made, but that with a little tweaking or doing it right, it could just be really better used. That's all. Sure. Especially for groceries, which is what people are going to be getting there. Yeah. I have questions perhaps for town staff, I guess, about winter maintenance of pedestrian facilities in this area. I know that the Route 1 sidewalks are generally plowed, but I'm not sure if that goes on to include Little Dolphin or Access Drive or the Foley Farm Road. And if not, is that something that could be addressed in this way? Because I think, our winters are long, and if the answer to that is no, then we're really only looking at a facility that's available half the year. Those are kind of my big comments.
Speak to that. I know, yeah, Public Works does, yeah, or it's in their budget for Route 1 sidewalks. I know in the past, though, without this residential piece being there, it maybe wasn't as high a priority. We just added the Gorham Road multi-use path, which obviously gets the next piece that would be fit into the budget for sidewalk plowing that we would consider. So it's kind of in these step and incremental ways to kind of keep broadening how that works. And obviously this is in the core of the town, so it would have a higher priority. It's just doesn't have the funding at this time and through our operation budget, I would say.
So Jen, I wanted to reply to your question about crash data. We typically look at the most recent 3-year period. So in this case, it was from 2017 to 2019. That's what's most available from DOT. And so it's possible that pedestrian crash happened prior to 2017. It's not being reported in the data that we have.
I have other feelings about leaving out fatality data points, even if they're one number and they're beyond 3 years ago, but that's a discussion for another time.
Yep, Dan here, I recall the same one, and I know Rocky does, that I think you're thinking of, Jen, that I believe came from down East Lane, that vicinity, pedestrian crossing from that side of the street to the west or north side of Route 1, where the sidewalk is, and in that kind of vicinity. I'm not sure if it was, maybe it was 15 or 16. It was in the last probably 5 to 6 years.
And Jen, this is Jay. To that point, we can certainly reach out to our police department and try to find out when exactly that was. I can't recall the year off the top of my head either.
That time frame sounds about right. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Jen. Robin.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna go to the growth management ordinance and talk about, I guess the question is for staff first. Have these folks been assigned growth permits already from the annual allocation?
No. So growth permits don't get assigned until there's actually an approved project, and they would have to apply for those. It's like applying for a building permit. It's not something that necessarily comes to the board or what have you.
Okay. Okay. Because I think that again, the senior housing is definitely reserve pool worthy, to make sure that they do have the appropriate growth management permit. I guess in general, I was just, whenever we have a 5-page memo of staff comments, I generally am a little sort of overwhelmed by all that's there, but I guess it sounds like Angela was asking the applicant about the 2 outfalls along the property line, but the applicant is saying that they already have been addressed. Can we get clarification there from the applicant on this?
Sam here. Yeah, so within the model, if I understand Angela's comments correctly, was it that you're looking for the level lip spreaders to be modeled as ponds?
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at the HydroCAD model is probably simplified, I guess is the word I would use. And it's looking in kind of big catchments and just putting out a point. I think, I know you have, I won't get into the detail, but I know you have some of the details. It's just looking at it more, I feel like more of a broad brush, and just because of the concerns that we've heard. And then also I had actually brought it up before we heard from the neighbors is just the proximity to that property line. There's really no real buffer. You're discharging, and while those are the level lip spreaders, and I appreciate the over design, I guess, and maybe we could talk a little bit more about that and understanding what that does and what the impact has on that. But when you start looking at how that's modeled in just, I guess that's it, in more general terms, and then a discharge point towards the Route 1, and then one heading out the other side here, seems maybe too simplified. That makes sense. And we can talk about that offline, but yeah, just wanting to dig in a little deeper.
Sure. Yeah, it might be best to have the kind of the technical discussion off of with everyone else, but appreciate it.
Great. And I just wanted to make sure that we weren't too far away from meeting in the middle, kind of a thing. So it sounds like that will happen. Forgive me if you already mentioned this, but how are you planning to incorporate pedestrian and I guess placemaking? Had you thought about the seating, trees, and coordination with Hannaford? Has any of that been set into motion?
Hey, Robin, it's Nick. Sorry, I missed I missed my handoff earlier. Couldn't get my hand over to the unmute button fast enough. But in terms of placemaking, we've identified a few areas. I think Evan touched on those where we have a pretty gracious drop-off area in front of the senior building. Yep. And then the building is designed such that it feels that you can kind of flow through the entry corridor. And there's a additional plaza kind of over to the east. And then in terms of connectivity, pedestrian connectivity, I think we have a good pedestrian connection here down to the south along the southern southeast portion, the entry drive, and that's all consistent with the master plan. So
will there be any coordination with Hannaford, I guess, on a pedestrian pathway?
We discussed it. I think Sam may have some comments, but we're looking at some site constraints there where there's quite a bit of slope dropping off the, Sam has a pointer, so he may be able to point out to you, but where it says Foley Farm Road, there's quite a drop in grade there.
Okay.
So it'd be challenging to get an ADA accessible connection over into that site. And also you'd essentially be dumping pedestrians into a parking lot with a lot of intersecting driveways and a lot of movement in there. So I think the idea was to utilize the existing sidewalk, which is in pretty good shape along Foley Farm Road.
Okay. In this case, would it have to be ADA compliant? Don't answer that.
Well, even if it wasn't, you'd be kind of dropping folks like into the back of the building.
Okay, I was just thinking of stairs or something like that would be good.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, and then can you speak to the easement for the stormwater and utilities that Jamel mentioned at the beginning, at the outset?
I can speak to that. Dan here. We've been working closely with Brooks and his team, and the intention certainly is our attorneys are beginning conversations, and we'll put together common maintenance agreements and easements. And our intention was to prepare that as part of the final subdivision application once we understand the board's comfortable with the layout. As we presented it tonight, we want to take this step, make sure the layout works, and then we put together that legal work for the board and staff's review.
Great. And I guess my last comment is just a comment and to thank you, Sam and Acorn Engineering, for really taking to heart the ordinances, how we'd like them to complement and conform to both the natural and built environment. I think the low impact development methods that I heard you discuss were, usually a developer comes in and says, oh yeah, I'm gonna put in a rain garden and there's my low impact development. You've really incorporated at least I heard at least 3 or 4 elements of low impact development into this, treating things on site, mimicking the existing conditions. So bravo, good job, team. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Roger?
Just to follow up on the sidewalks in Hannaford. So I assume the path right now goes from access road to the back where the loading platform is for Hannaford? Is that basically what the path is right now? It would be, you know, it would be nice, actually, it would be nice for Hannaford, actually, if they could create some sort of a sidewalk between the end of their shopping plaza, not their parking lot, but the, you know, where the paper patch is and before the Key Bank building. Because I can imagine that there'll be seniors who will want to walk down to Hannaford. And it's actually a shame they have to walk all the way down the path, the sidewalk, down the Hannaford Drive and then walk all the way up through a parking lot to get to the grocery store. So it would be nice if there was some accommodation, but I would think that would benefit Hannaford and that would certainly be more of their responsibility. Just a thought on that, because I can see, you know, shopping carts going up to the up to the senior center and everything. I wanted to ask Angela on the letter we received from the Foleys. Based on what you heard during the presentation, is that would that satisfy their concerns?
I think, as Sam had said, it might be beneficial to talk in detail, just because he even referred to, I guess, in your opening comments was about the swale that goes back through the woods. That's part of the comments you saw in their concern about added flow in that channel. So there was some of that that we probably should really detail what's coming off the site and adding to specifically that channel. And I know Sam talked about not adding channelized flow off the site. So we just want to make sure we can show that and how it's getting redirected. Because I think at the time, right now, the resident had talked about with the tree clearing, more water is heading that way through the channel. And if we can show through Sam's modeling that gets diverted in a different way and spread out, I think that'll be the key. And I guess that's where I'm looking for Acorn to kind of provide that, to be able to show the details and to show those specific numbers.
Yeah, I've been happy to follow up afterwards. And just to reiterate too, with the spreaders, I mean, those have been positioned and pushed towards the north so that we're encouraging as much flow away from the single family, whereas in the present condition, you know, the natural grade line actually brings that runoff towards the single family. So really, you know, trying to make every effort to get the best design out of this.
Okay. The only other thing I wanted to mention is staff had a comment about the parking area, dead end parking. But when I looked at your plans for the overall site, I think that's not going to be a dead end in your ultimate plans. Is that correct?
That's correct, Roger. You know, the master plan of course includes this full loop.
Right, yeah.
But even as built, and certainly can understand staff's concern, but even with just the senior housing site as proposed here, you know, I'm not sure if this was the dead end area, but with the 24-foot drive aisles and kind of this continuous loop, you know, it is fully, there's full circulation through the site, and we've also run the 40-foot fire truck through. So in our view, we don't have any concerns with the circulation as proposed.
Okay, I'm all.
Roger, maybe if I could just to,
Sure, yeah.
touch on that point, I think one of the elements that, maybe part of where the conversations come from is really just having a greater understanding of what the site is going to look like before phase 2 gets underway. We've heard that, they're talking about sort of a gravel cover and what have you. But really understanding what the separation will be, for example, the drive aisle, that's sort of on the left of the screen right now, sort of that long gray area between the gray and the blue. Is that just going to be pavement right up to gravel? Will there be some type of separation, or right at the end, in that sort of dead end point that I think that Sam was pointing out, really, will there be sort of a opportunity for vehicles to use that gravel area to turn around on if they get to that point? So just really understanding what that relationship's going to look like, because at this point we're not sure how far off that office space is, right? It could be they could come in with an application next month, or it could be next year. And so really just understanding, again, sort of what the what that transitional period is going to look like a little bit better, I think was what we were part of what we were asking there anyway.
Just one quick question, maybe for Dan. The existing building where the Town and Country Credit Union is located, is that fully occupied?
So Town and Country, just as you observed, probably added on their other half, and it's not fully occupied, but they're beginning to, well, in the world of the pandemic, I'm not sure there's any office buildings that are fully occupied, but in the future, they're going to incrementally fill that space. So before March, they needed some of that additional space, and then we're going to grow into it over the next few years. To answer your question, just the other thing to Jay's comment, we'll certainly work on the phasing plan to be clear about the condition of quote unquote phase 2. As these things go, the housing projects need approval quickly, but often don't get funded quickly. So there's a good chance that the office site will be built at the same time. It could actually, Brooks wouldn't like this, but it could beat kind of the housing project as well, or it could trail. So, but we'll update the phasing plan to show how the site will be kind of maintained if it does trail the senior housing.
Okay, one last thing. Could you go back to the screen that you just had before this one? Yeah, that one. See the end of the, going back to that path again, see the end of the building there where Hannaford is? That's what I'm talking about right there. If anything, and I don't see it as your responsibility, but if you're having any discussions with Hannaford, that's where, I don't even, does Hannaford own that whole shopping plaza?
They do. They own this plaza, and then slightly to the bottom left of the screen, you've got Key Bank. So there's actually two distinct owners there. We have studied trying to provide connection here, as Nick was talking about, but there's challenges with the topography where you've kind of got this built up berm, this grass strip is quite a drop down. And then furthermore, this is really for the truck access. So this driveway that comes around, this is where they get all their deliveries.
Yeah.
So it's a great idea in theory, but for this specific application, it's really tough to kind of make that link.
Okay. Okay. Too bad. All right, I'm all set.
And Roger, I'd just also note that it's my understanding that Hannaford actually leases the land. So they don't actually own the land. They certainly control, the building and what have you, and a lot of what goes on there, but there is a lease with that they're under.
I do have another question, maybe for Brooks. Would this senior center, senior housing, would they have like a van or something that takes their residents around?
Yeah, we do. The Housing Authority has a van, and we make regular trips from our building to to, like weekly trips to go shopping, or we also do weekly field trips, things like that.
So there wouldn't be one dedicated to this particular facility.
No, it would be like on a rotating regular schedule.
Okay,
And
all right,
shared with the
okay.
other buildings.
I'm trying to get these people into Hannaford. Okay, I'm all set.
Roger. I'll just echo that thought. I mean, it's real. I mean, Roger, I'm kind of on the same page as you. As you know, that's probably where they're going to most likely want to go. I also suspect that they'll do the college footpath thing, which is they'll create their own pathway over time through the easiest point of access. Well, that might not be helpful in the winter. I'm sure in the other 3 seasons they'll make use of it. Rachel, did we have a chance at having you go on this one?
No, I've been feeling left out here. Let's go back to take a look at the building design, if you would, from the outside. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate this design. It's not a typical oblong or rectangle with a cupola on top. You've made a real effort to blend it. I assume these are likely to be the colors. If so, I see those blending in very well with the environment. I like the bay windows. I certainly appreciate the interior, which is not particularly for this session, but I do have a couple of comments to make on that for you to consider. And one is you did mention that you were going to have an area for bicycle storage, and I don't see that. I don't see that on the plan, so I'd appreciate being able to see that. And if it's an external bicycle storage, you're going to have to need to consider how it is screened, while at the same time folks can get to it. If it's going to be inside in a separate building, we need to see that. On the first floor, just an observation to my left, looking at this, on the first floor, you have the dumpster area, the waste area, and the laundry. There we go. Since people are going to enter that waste area from the inside of the building, all I can visualize or imagine I can smell in the summer in the heat is when people open those doors, and if it's been 3 days since the trash has been picked up, the smell coming into the building. So I would appreciate knowing how you're actually going to deal with that. And in terms of the laundry area, that can be terribly noisy. What sort of soundproofing are you going to look at between the laundry area and the apartment next to it? Those are just some things I was thinking about as I looked at the plans. I appreciate especially the siting of some sitting areas, both on all of the floors actually, next to the end units, and see that as a place for neighbors to gather. I appreciate what you've talked about in terms of people being able to walk from the dropout through the lobby, through the living area, and out onto the back patio. Now, part of that patio is placemaking, a sort of placemaking for the building itself. When you described what you were going to do at our initial meeting, somehow or other I got the sense that area was, external area was going to be pretty robust, and I'm not sure I would define that patio as robust. I can, however, see with the addition of seating, especially perhaps it could be boulder seating in areas where people can sit and appreciate the rain garden. That would be an important amenity for the residents. So consider how you're going to use that space, even where you have the rain garden, to add to the enjoyment of the residents. I also would recommend that you listen to the staff when they start talking about some benches along the pathways. Placemaking is also for people, for the public. And benches along that pathway, I could point to it on my screen, which of course isn't going to help you. But the pathway that goes around the building trail and enters into the back, that's going to be, and that can be, both for the residents. Yep, you've got it. Both for the residents and for public who just wants to stroll by and perhaps look at the rain garden or sit down. But also it would be helpful to have those benches in terms of placemaking heading down towards Little Dolphin Way or Little Dolphin Road, whatever. I think you really have proposed something here that is going to be a real addition to Scarborough and help for the seniors. I do have one question, and that is, when you build a facility like this, is there any, I'm trying to think of the right word, is there any bonus for somebody who wants to go there who is a resident of Scarborough, or is it first come, first served from all of the surrounding territories when it goes up for rental?
I could certainly answer that. I'll have to check on that. I know that we can and do give preferences on some of the buildings. I'm just not sure if community from which somebody comes is one of them, but I can check on that for next meeting.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that, because some of the discussion that we've had during the comp plan and in other points is that what we kind of like to see in Scarborough is a constant flow of residents from those people who come in as newlyweds and starting their families, and the first thing they do as newlyweds is they rent an apartment, and then they work to find a house, a detached house, as their family comes along, and as they age and they want to stay in Scarborough, then they look for this sort of senior housing, selling their house and opening it up for another family to move in. And that sort of continuum of families and residents in our town really is what makes this a very good community to live in. So if there is a possibility that residents of Scarborough kind of get 5 points added to their score or to their application, so that we can say, when people say, well, you're just adding apartment after apartment after apartment, it's really helpful for people to be able to say, these are really for our people. There are going to be new people. New people are good. They bring fresh life into the town. But we are thinking about our seniors who are already in Scarborough, providing a place for them to age until it's time to move to the next stage. So I would appreciate your taking a look at that, and I compliment you on what you've done here, especially the architecture. I really like that. I like the siding. I think there's some tweaking here and there, but you're really well on your way, and thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Just a quick announcement. We are past 9 o'clock. So items 14, 15, and 16, if you're online for those, you are going to be continued until the next planning board meeting date, which I believe is in 2 weeks from now. Item number 13, I'm just going to ask you to stick around for a minute while we wrap up discussion on 12. We still have Rick, and Rick, I believe, I don't know if there's anything that they want to offer on this. Rick Meinking, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. when you submit this again, could you provide an electronic copy of the photometrics? I can't figure out where you're getting the 2.08 foot candles as an average in the parking areas. That's pretty high considering IES has, anywhere from 0.8 to 1.2 for public and parking areas. So maybe providing an electronic copy and maybe including the intensity graphs from the fixtures you have chosen might be helpful to try and see if it can't get toned down a bit. But also you're using 4,000 K, and I'm just wondering why you chose 4,000 versus what a lot of places are using the 3,000 K. And if you go with 4,000, what would potentially that look like compared to the build out of the next section of the site? Staff has a couple of comments on shielding and stuff, and maybe with the intensity graphs, you might be able to do some placements of these fixtures in a way that you won't have any spillover. And then finally, Brooks, I commend you on the solar system you're proposing. Can you put a little bit of information in the narrative next time so we have an idea of what? I'm just trying to think of, the generating capacity of Scarborough as it starts to grow and as this technology is becoming very affordable for lots of entities. It'd be nice to know what some of our generating capacities are becoming. That would be much appreciated. And then finally, I think the 3 compact parking spots that you have up there in the corner might be a fantastic place to put some EV chargers. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Rick. Richter Perry.
We still seem to be having audio
Yeah, I
problems.
think he's having issues with his mic or something.
All right. So I think most of my colleagues have covered the brunt of the concerns and some of the staff comments. And I think I'll just summarize by saying that we kind of look forward to seeing this kind of reworked a little and then back in front of us. And otherwise, I like the architecture of the building. I think it is a good project for Scarborough. So like I said, I look forward to it. I think some tweaks and some updated information is going to help out on the next meeting and get you where you want to go. So is the applicant and staff clear on all of the points? Do we need to clarify anything for anyone going forward?
I think one I may want to say to the board is if you're comfortable with preliminary subdivision, because since it's a multifamily building, it needs both preliminary and final. So I think we're very aware of what we need to do to update it for a final approval, but we're hopeful that you would issue preliminary tonight. Because I know that Brooks and his team need to submit this for funding in September. And there's very few meetings between now and then to get both preliminary and final.
Could whoever's sharing a screen, could they end that for right now? Because it's easier for me to do a quick poll of the board if I could see everyone on my screen. Can I just get a quick, gut reaction to a preliminary this evening from the board? Just a quick head nod, or do you want to see revisions before we get to that? I saw Roger nod his head. He's okay with it. Rachel's okay with it. Robin, your face is stuck. I don't know what to make of that. There we go. Are you comfortable with preliminary this evening, Robin? Yeah, up in the air, Jennifer? She's good with it. All right, so I'll make a motion to preliminary approve the Oak Hill Senior Housing LP subdivision and site plan for 41 Little Dolphin Drive, Assessors Map U45 Lot 4A.
Second.
I have a motion is second. Any discussion? Okay, roll call. Rachel,
Yes.
Robin,
Yes, for preliminary approval.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Roger. Roger, you're on mute.
Yes.
Nick, yes. All right. Good luck, gentlemen. We expect to see a fully revised plan next time around.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, so I got to do another quick poll of the board here. It is past 9 o'clock, and I know we said we wouldn't take up any more of anyone's evening past 9. But I did do want a quick straw poll. There is on the next item. It's straightforward what's being proposed. However, I'm not sure the discussion is necessarily or the debate over whether the is as straightforward. Knowing that you could spend quite a bit of time on this, I'm going to just quickly ask the board if they wanted to pick this matter up this evening or delay it until 2 weeks at the next official board meeting. And I personally am open to it either way. The only reason I thought maybe it would be worthwhile this evening is we know there's a lot of lots in there that are going to be impacted by this decision. And I don't know what this would do to a time frame for the end users, but again,
I think we've already gone above and beyond to have 2 meetings this month, so I'm not comfortable moving forward on anything else since there was a hard line drawn at 9 o'clock for both meetings.
Thank you, Robin.
Mhm.
Anyone else want to chime in on this?
Is this time sensitive?
Aren't they all?
Right.
Well, I mean,
Right, they all are, Roger.
yeah, but I mean, is there something, can this wait for the next meeting, or is there something going on that we're not aware of?
I think you're muted, Dan. There you
I
go.
can't read his lips.
Yes, it is time sensitive in terms of providing power to the first end users, the AV Tech in particular, on lot 28, I believe. And finalizing their power needs, they're going to be occupying in August. So if the board is willing, we'd love to talk about it.
Won't they be first on the agenda in our meeting in 2 weeks?
I believe so, unless there's a zoning proposal or something, correct?
Yeah. So it'll definitely be heard in 2 weeks, correct?
It would be early in the agenda, certainly.
Okay.
My understanding. Rachel and Jennifer, you want to weigh in real quick on that?
I defer to those people who have really spent a lot of time here. The next meeting is July 13th. I think we can wait.
Thanks. Jennifer?
I also think we should wait until next time.
All right. Sounds like a majority of the board there. So, all right, Dan, thanks. We'll see you at July 14th at that meeting. We'll move on to staff report, which is item number 8.
I think it's July 13th, I believe.
July
Isn't it?
13th. Yep.
Yeah. 14th is the election.
All right. So staff report, item 18.
Sure, I'll jump in. Others may have some, just 2 quick updates for the board. One, it's almost a month ago now, and haven't had a chance to update you, but just want to let you know that council passed an emergency ordinance in response to the current pandemic to allow for businesses in town to be able to set up outdoor sales and service areas without having to go back through a planning board review process. There is a established administrative review team, which consists of the director of SEDCO, the Economic Development Corporation, a representative from the police, a representative from fire, and myself as the planning director. And there's sort of certain criteria that businesses need to demonstrate. And it's time it's a set time. It lasts through no later than October 15th, or whenever the governor if the pandemic ends before October 15th, whichever comes first. October 15th, unfortunately, looking like the more likely date. So if you start to see, and you probably already have started to see, tents pop up or picnic tables pop up or what have you, know those have been reviewed. They are part of this emergency ordinance in action that council took to try to help support our local businesses to the best of our ability, while still be sure that we're operating safely and maintaining proper vehicular access, pedestrian access, and those sorts of things. So just wanted to update you all on that. And then also just update you all on, you may have heard the Ordinance Committee working with the Long Range Planning Committee is taking a deep dive into our growth management ordinance and really looking at a number of the provisions that are in there. And so that'll be going on through the summer. And then, trickling back up through to council, probably late summer and into the fall. But I just thought planning board members might like to know about that. And so Robin, I'm sorry if I stepped on your toes for something you might be updating, but just wanted to be sure I got that out, and I will leave it at that.
I have a few updates. We've had 3 pre-construction meetings in the last few months. You may all remember the Verizon Tower down at Black Point Road. I'm sure you do. They had their pre-con, maybe 2 months or so ago, and they plan on constructing that tower this summer. We did hold a pre-construction meeting for the Throttle Car Club, which was approved in early June by the board and the Innovation District. And then staff was able to hold a pre-construction meeting for the town center residential subdivision within the Downs last week as well. So several new construction projects are up and going. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jamel. All right, we have administrative amendment report.
Sure, I'll be quick again. We've had several administrative amendments reviewed and approved. The first one being the On the Vine Market. They are constructing a curb extension with plantings within their existing parking area. Camp Ketcha is constructing 2 new yurts for the summer. AV Technic had an administrative amendment for additional parking spaces, more than they were thinking. And then finally, Town and Country Federal Credit Union, the site across the street from the last project we were just reviewing, were approved for additional sidewalk and a generator pad in their parking area. That's all I have.
Thanks, Jamel.
You got it.
Correspondence. Okay. Planning board comments.
Yeah, I was just gonna sort of elaborate on sort of what Jay is thinking, and that was part of my sort of firm pushback on doing too much sort of adjusting to meet what's being considered this bubble of development in Scarborough. I think that, not to put words in any of the town councilors' mouths or with any of the committees, but I think we'll see whether or not this is a bubble or whether this is really a demonstration in a long-term trend where we're developing not only a 500-acre, around the Downs, which, as they reminded us during the master planning process, that 500 acres is as big as the Portland Peninsula. So we're developing something that large, as well as Higas, all of the development on Route 1, the industrial park. So the town councilors are really thinking hard about growth management and the pace of development. So on the long range planning committee, this has been a very difficult discussion. And I guess if anybody wants more information, I'd be happy to talk with you or provide more information. Again, I'm not sure what I can provide one-on-one with another planning board member for fear of being ex parte or something like that. But I think it's definitely worth noting that there's, I don't know, Jay, what am I trying to say? I guess I'm done. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say, and I guess I won't try to put words in anyone's mouth either, is that the last meeting was recorded and hopefully will be up online so folks can see that. And just in terms of the sort of ex parte communication, that's really about pending applications. So for all board members, you know, if you're talking about an ordinance, certainly I think, you know, board members can have discussions around those. It's really when you're sitting in sort of your judgment role, if you will, when you have an applicant who's provided evidence before you, that's where ex parte becomes an area of concern. But I would say really going back and watching, for those that are interested, going back and watching the ordinance committee meeting of June, looking at the long range planning committee of June as well, I suppose it was. I think that's where folks could, you know, glean what's sort of happening there if you're so inclined.
Roger.
Regarding this, taking a look at the permitting and everything again, is anybody taking a look at the growth and services report? Because the thing, I happen to have I have the privilege of serving on that committee. Glaring conclusions that came out of that committee was the lack of multiplex or apartments, or especially senior housing, things like that. We had a tremendous amount of single family homes, but not 8 affordable apartments and things such as that. And the thing that has struck me lately, all of a sudden we're getting all these senior housing, units available or in the works. I think that's terrific, and the other apartments as well. So and most of this, there's a lot of commercial activity. It reminds me of the late 80s and the amount of activity. So, but I see it as a good thing. The diversity of the housing stock seems to be gaining, getting a little bit more balanced, which I think is a good thing. So I just wanted to add that. I'm glad somebody, if they are looking at growth and services, because it's interesting when I look back and see where the town has gone through that period of time to where we are now. It's interesting to see that. My 2 cents.
Thanks, Roger. Anyone else on planning board comments? No? I'll just quickly add that I really appreciate all the extra efforts here, not only by the board members, but definitely staff. I can see that at least 2 of you are sitting in the office this late at night, and I'm sure that's not it's not always the best, but we appreciate it. I mean, I hope the applicants and the people of this town realize how much everyone sitting here tonight really cares about what happens and all the efforts that are being put in. So appreciate it, everyone. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a second on that.
Second.
Okay, let's call to a vote. Rachel.
Yes.
Roger.
Yes.
Robin.
Yes.
Jennifer.
Yes.
Yes. Good night, everyone. I really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Good night.
Guys,
Thank you, Nick.
thank you.
Okay.